A new research study came out from University of Massachusetts suggesting that Black Lives Matter protests have led up to a 20% decrease in police homicides. So this is the story here. University of Massachusetts Amherst economist Travis Campbell finds places that had BLM protests experience a 15 to 20% decrease in police homicides over the ensuing 5 years, around 300 fewer deaths is what this is. So let me break this down for you, what happened exactly. So this researcher, Travis Campbell from UMass Amherst, went and did a research study that did not include 2020. So I want to make that really, really clear. The George Floyd protests, everything that happened in 2020, that data was not taken into consideration when he was doing this research study. So he looked at 5 years from 2014 until 2019, and he compiled all the data. And what he did was he looked at 1,654 protests, Black Lives Matter protests that happened all around the country. And he went and found that when there was a protest large enough, so areas of the country with large enough protests, so at least 4,000 participants had to have shown up for the protests, he found a direct decrease in police homicides in that area of 15 to 20%. So there was an absolute effect that happened. So when you go out there, you protest, you tell your city, we're sick of it. We're not going to put up with it anymore, this police brutality or all of the stuff that is going on. That works. That is what this research study shows, that actually getting out there and voicing your opinions, voicing how upset you are, voicing that you want change works. And those 5 years that he studied, he found that the decrease resulted in, over the course of 5 years, a total of what he calculates to be 300 fewer police killings in those cities specifically that had at least 4,000 participants show up. So that's not 300 a year, that's 300 total over the course of 5 years, okay? That he found that there was a decrease in police killings. That's good news. That shows us that the real good news on that is it shows us that protests work, right? It shows us that there's actually something to getting out there and voicing yourself and expressing yourself and getting to the streets. And this is before the riots of 2020. This is before George Floyd. So don't calculate that into this. This is just people going out there, voicing their opinions, protesting, probably takes into consideration the kneeling and all that stuff, right? All of that resulted in a 15 to 20% decrease in police killings over the course of 5 years. However, one big stat that was in this research paper that got kind of overlooked. He didn't try to bury it. He didn't really try to hide it. I will say that Travis Campbell clearly seemed to be more on the side of wanting to have a positive outcome from the research study for BLM. But one glaring piece of research that came out, one stat that came out showed that though the police homicides went down by 300 people over the course of 5 years, the problem was homicides by civilians went up by 10%. And that resulted in anywhere from at least 1,000 up to 6,000 additional murders happened in those areas with the BLM protests that resulted in fewer police killings. Now, he doesn't really say why he thinks that is. He kind of says why he thinks why, but he says he didn't dive too deep into that research, again, because this guy is, I think it's pretty clear when you read the paper that he's a bit more on the pro-BLM side, so he didn't want to kind of show a negative light to it. But he did kind of speculate that perhaps the reason why homicides potentially, he says that they went up 10%. He tries to give a soft number of 1,000 to 6,000. But the number is 6,000 because he says 10%. And what we know is that we get about, for homicides, not including suicide. Okay, so these are homicide, just deaths by homicide each year. There's about 17,000 annually. And you multiply that by 5, and 10% of that is more than 6,000. And he was saying that it was an increase of 6,000. It was a 10% increase. And we know that the homicides happen in major cities and that the BLM protests happen in major cities. So all you have to do is kind of connect the dots. And he kind of gave a soft number. again, because he was sort of padding it. But even 1,000 extra deaths from murder is significant, and 6,000 is even more significant. So, let's say it's 4,000, if we want to be, try to pad it a bit. But so most of those were Black people. And so one has to kind of ask themselves this question: what does this mean for Black Lives Matter? If you are going to reduce the deaths by cop by 300 over the course of 5 years, that sounds good. Unless you're trading possibly 6,000 other people in exchange for those 300. So 6,000 potentially other people died of homicide. And he speculates maybe it's because of reduced police action, reduced policing, reduced police hesitation, right? So police are not as willing to go into certain situations because they're afraid that if they make a wrong move and something happens, that suddenly they're going to be held liable. They're potentially facing prison time of however many years, so people are afraid. People don't want to be called a racist. Police forces are trying their best to, police less in certain areas because they don't want the appearance of over-policing. And that potentially has resulted in more homicides. So I think that this requires a serious discussion about BLM. And I think that what it really, this is a nuanced discussion. This isn't one of those things where it's like, oh, it's all good or it's all bad, So, oh, wow, it resulted in 6,000 deaths, therefore just don't do it. Well, no, we have to protest things. Whether you agree with BLM or not, it doesn't matter. Protesting is part of the American spirit. That's what we have to do in order to make change in America. Revolting in some way has always been a part of the American spirit. That's, American Revolution, right? So the bigger question is, what is it that is there a better way to have the Black Lives Matter movement without resulting in this demonization of the police to the point where they don't even want to show up on your behalf? Because remember, what you're ultimately asking someone to do, they don't really have to do, right? They're human beings. So this human being, you've called a human being, you're in danger, something's going on, right? You think your life is at risk and you don't feel like you can protect yourself. So you call another human being, another person. A lot of people want to kind of turn cops into non-humans when they're having this discussion. And I think that's not doing a service to the situation. You are wanting to call another human being who doesn't even live in your area a lot of the time, right? They're not familiar with you. They don't have any familial relations with you, or they're not related to you. They don't love you. They don't know you, right? They don't know. There's no connection for them to you. And you're asking this person who doesn't know anything about you to come to your aid and potentially put their own life at risk to save yours. Some stranger, you're asking a stranger to risk their life to save yours. Now, some people might say, yeah, but that's their job. They don't have to do that job. And actually, right now, we're having a problem. There's actually what they call a crisis. They cannot find enough police. We have a growing population that is increasing, and we have a dwindling police force. Now, some people might be championing that, but not if that means 6,000 extra people dead. Right? I mean, that's not anything to celebrate. You might want fewer police, but at what cost? There's a lot of areas in this world that have very few police, and the cost is extremely high crime. So, you're asking the stranger to come to your aid, to put their life at risk to save yours. And when they possibly do, and maybe they don't do the best job of doing it, and they make a mistake, suddenly, they're facing being totally demonized, their lives being completely ruined, their families' lives being completely ruined, their children's lives being completely ruined, and they don't even know you. So that person doesn't even want to do that job. I mean, if I would never sign up to be a cop in today's climate. There's no way in hell you could talk me into being a cop and coming to save your life when you might just turn around and call me a racist. I'm not going to do it. No way. So maybe the conversation has just gotten too intense, right? And maybe in order to save those 6,000 people, we shouldn't go so extreme in our demands. So when we're demanding change, maybe the change shouldn't be things like defund the police or abolish police, which is now where some people are going with it, is much, and that's the thing, right? So when I first heard defund the police, I thought, what the hell is this? Like, this is crazy. No way. Sorry, but I need police. I've had police save me numerous times in my life. I like them to continue to do that and to be willing to do that. So that sounds crazy to me. And then people say, oh, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean get rid of the police like you think. Oh, really? It doesn't? Because now you have people actually saying abolish police. And now they're saying it on, CNN and MSNBC, and Rashida Tlaib is saying it in Congress. I mean, it has gone down that path where now you have people calling to just get rid of them altogether, saying just get rid of them. We don't need them. When we do need them, we do need them. There's really bad people in this world. So maybe that isn't the best battle cry when we're trying to make change. Maybe the best battle cry isn't all cops are racist. Right? Maybe that isn't exactly the best narrative. And maybe it isn't so wise to demonize cops every single time something happens. Every time they kill somebody, which look, it's all extremely tragic, and they should absolutely be retrained to disarm and de-escalate in a better way than they are now. Nobody disagrees with that. So that needs to happen. But perhaps the narrative has gotten so out of control that now it's to a point where cops don't even want to show up for you. And because they're not showing up for you, 6,000 more people die. So maybe we need to work on slogans and narratives and what we're actually asking for. When things get too radical, no change gets made. Actually, change does happen, but for the worse. And that is what I think we want to try to avoid. If Black lives really do matter, and if the majority of those 6,000 extra homicides were Black lives, then you've got a problem. Black lives are piling up in the morgue, and it's not cops killing them all the time. The vast majority of the time, it isn't. So what can we do to really, truly save Black lives? And that, it seems to be, I think there definitely needs to be that conversation. And of course, a lot of people don't want to have that conversation. It's a taboo conversation to have. Me bringing it up, I'm already going to get a slew of emails calling me a racist or saying I just don't understand Black issues. I don't need to understand Black issues to understand numbers and to understand numbers of bodies piling up in the morgue. So this is a conversation that needs to be had. Now, this guy admits that those numbers are in there. He doesn't make excuses for those numbers. He was asked about those numbers, like, what about all these thousands of people that have died now from murder? And he kind of goes, and then he says, hey, at least we know Black Lives protests work, right? Like reduced police killings. And yes, that is a correct conclusion to make. There were approximately 300 fewer police homicides. That is true. That statement is true. And it does show us that these protests do work. But at what expense? That is also true. It is also true that homicides went up in general, crime went up in general in those areas. And this was before 2020. So you cannot blame it on the pandemic. You cannot blame it on desperation and people losing their jobs and a bad economy. The economy was going up during those years, not down. So the only correlation, because we know when the economy goes down, crime goes up. That is a correlation. So obviously that would be something. But in this situation, the economy was going up all those years. And actually, Black unemployment had gone down to the lowest levels that it had ever been. So the only correlation that could really be made is, in fact, these protests put pressure on the police departments to ultimately not do their job. And so they didn't. And bodies piled up in the morgue. So I think this should serve as a cautionary tale for when we call for change, when we call for reform. We have to stick to a message that is obtainable and that doesn't put us in a worse situation. That's what we have to do. We have to focus those messages and don't let the most radical amongst us end up with that megaphone and changing the entire trajectory of what the purpose of the protest was for. Because then you just become a lunatic. It just becomes radical. It becomes fringe. People then don't support it. It becomes like, what the hell is this? I don't understand. And that's what we cannot have, right? So it's not about, incrementalism or moderation or even compromise, but it is about staying sane and sticking with a message that actually is what the intended purpose of the protest is for. And that is to have better policing.